Thank you so much for doing this, Patrick. It really means a lot to me.
Yeah, absolutely, Ishan. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
hmm So, what's it like in New York right now?
Well, right now, we're just starting to get some warmer weather. I think right now with COVID and the pandemic, things are just starting to open up, and so people are just starting to be in the parks again and going out to restaurants. So I know different parts of the world are sort of experiencing COVID differently right now, but New York is sort of at a place where it's just starting to really open up again. And I think the nicer weather is helping.
Hmm. Okay. In Pune, I'm in Pune and we're still in lockdown. I mean, they haven't opened up much yet. I mean, I'm having a lot of difficulties in even ordering equipment for my podcast. Luckily, I have a mic at home. I might get my boom stand on time, so it'll be much better because I have to come all the way here to speak much better. But let's hope things go great. So,
Yeah,
if you were to give my give the audience an introduction on who is Patrick Lynn, how would you introduce yourself?
for sure. So, I would say I think I consider, I'm currently in law school. I consider myself sort of a lawyer in training, I think as a result. But, I've been interested in pursuing a career in law for actually a very long time, even when I was a young teenager. And so this is sort of an area that I've been interested in for a long time. I love advocating for people. I love being able to, I think work on really complicated issues. But even long before I was interested in law, I was interested in technology. At a very young age, I really liked watching science fiction movies, like Terminator, Matrix,
Wow.
Star Wars, all those sorts of things. And so um, I get that that's all sort of, not real, but that sort of got me interested in this space to begin with. And through a lot of other experiences I've had throughout high school, university, and now in law school, I've sort of really built up this interest and I think a little bit of knowledge in artificial intelligence and sort of how it intersects with the law as well.
Hmm. So basically, you developed an interest in AI through movies.
Yeah, I think in the very beginning, I think like a lot of people, that's sort of in many ways, I think the first real introduction, I think, to artificial intelligence, right? I think before we start learning about it in school, before we are really introduced to it in maybe a more formal capacity, we first see, robots,
Hmm.
artificial intelligence, things like that on television or in movies.
Wow. So, how old were you when you first started to actually learn and, um, expose yourself to the world of artificial intelligence?
So how did I first expose myself to that space?
Right.
Yeah. So, I would say my first real formal introduction was actually when I was in undergrad, when I was in university.
Hmm.
I had the opportunity to intern for it's an organization in the United States called the Legal Aid Society. It's actually the largest criminal legal defense organization in the United States. And I actually was first working on DNA forensics cases. And so through that experience, I learned about sort of how algorithms were used to analyze DNA samples and how that was sort of an automated process. And I think, I'm not necessarily sure sort of what, your background is in that space, but I think when we think about DNA, we think, oh, this is scientific, this is technical. So it's got to be objective, it's got to be fair. Someone
Yeah.
in a white coat or someone from a laboratory is telling me the results. So it's got to be right. And I quickly learned that that just wasn't the case. While it's a really interesting development in science, and certainly it's been really helpful, it's also been used in ways that are biased towards certain communities, at least in the United States. And so that was sort of my first introduction. And from there, I started reading more about sort of how AI and how algorithms were used to determine even things like how long someone should stay in prison for, or
What do you
where
mean by
police.
that? How long should someone stay in prison for?
Yeah, that's right. In the United States, there are algorithms used by judges in courthouses to do things to even decide, before trial, should someone be staying in jail or should they be allowed to go home? When making decisions about parole, right? This idea of whether someone, after showing good behavior while they've been serving time in prison, is this incarcerated person able to be released? And algorithms are making these decisions for a lot of these people and a lot of these institutions. And even in sentencing, in the United States, algorithms are even being used to determine things like, is this person at a high risk of recommitting a crime, and should they go to prison? And so we're seeing, I think these sort of hidden and secret algorithms, right? They're invisible to us. It's not like a police officer walking down the street and you might second guess maybe their motives or things like that. But with algorithms, we don't know that they're being used necessarily, and especially for the general public, we might not even think about it. And so it's sort of I think this scary space. And I think while AI can be used as a really effective tool, I think right now in the way that we're seeing it used in government, at least in the US, there's some dangers there.
Wow. That just hit me. I mean, AI is being used by judges. How did you feel when you first found out that AI is being used to pass judgment by a robot instead of a human being doing the same?
Yeah, I mean, at least in the United States, in most jurisdictions, a judge will still make the ultimate decision, but they can rely on the algorithm. And so what we've seen sometimes is there's certainly been cases where a judge might have their own prejudices. They might not like a certain group of people, and you might not necessarily know that by just sitting in a courtroom, but an algorithm might legitimize that decision, or might help sort of cover their own biases, right?
Right.
So now all of a sudden you have judges who can say, well, I gave this person this sentence because the algorithm said it was fine, right? And so I guess to more specifically answer your question, I think it's really terrifying having a machine make these decisions, right? And I think in the last
Right.
maybe last 2 decades, at least in the U.S., we started getting this idea that we're recognizing that humans as people, we have biases, we have prejudices, that there are certain things that we try to catch ourselves doing. We might before we even get to know someone, we might have these preconceived notions of who or what they might be like.
Right.
But the problem is we've created machines and we think, oh, well, the AI is objective, the machine is fair, the algorithm will be objective, but we forget that it's people who make these machines, right? It's not like the AI is some sort of magical thing that will solve all of our problems, right? I think we often think of it as such. But people made the machines and people choose how to use machines, right? And so it's not like we're seeing AI being used in a way that's, I think remedying a lot of these problems. I think AI often is used to punish in the criminal justice system, and that's what we're seeing. And so I think it's a really scary thing, and I think even though people have their own prejudices, people can change, right? People can be taught to be more accepting or to be more sympathetic. But a machine cannot. A machine cannot disobey. It cannot dissent, and it won't make exceptions necessarily. And so I think that's sort of that rigidity, and I think the biases that we've seen machines exhibit. I think that's a problem.
So I don't know. Is this when you say it is not biased, how unbiased is artificial intelligence towards making its decision? What do you think?
Right. And so, to be clear, what I was saying earlier is I think that's an idea that a lot of people are getting. I think the way that AI, especially the way it's used to police people, the way it's used in the courtroom, things like that, I think there's a lot of bias, actually. And I think the problem really starts with our reliance on historical data, right? When we rely on data in the past, what that ultimately does is we're just repeating patterns that we've seen in history, right? And so, if certain communities are constantly being policed or being watched or being surveilled, and that's what the data says, if we rely on that data to train algorithms, right, to use that to train the machine learning algorithms, it's just going to repeat those same patterns over and over and over again. And all of a sudden, you have a situation where AI is actually just reflecting the past into the future. And I think we don't really think
Wow.
about that, right? We
Right.
often think
Yeah.
of, oh, like AI is this panacea, right? It's going to fix everything. But if we're training it using the past, it's just going to
Hmm.
repeat the same past mistakes over and over and over again. And in my research, that's what I'm seeing time and time again. And so I think that's a really sort of scary thing that's happening right now in AI.
Hmm.
So I certainly do think that there is bias there.
Right. Like, I don't think people understand when they talk about artificial intelligence is that, there's always talk about data security and my data is at risk when I put with my Facebook account and stuff. I don't think people realize that artificial intelligence feeds on data. In order for a robot to wish you a happy birthday on your birthday, it has to know that your birthday is on so and so day. It needs to know that your date is on April 14th, 2009, to know that you're like how old, what would be the age? Okay, it needs to know that you're like 11 or 12 years old. I don't think people realize that AI feeds on data. Right,
Yeah,
like
I
you just
think
said,
yeah,
you just spoke about the historical data. So basically you're trying to tell me that AI relies on historical data, the data of the past, instead of actually. So like what are these algorithms they run on? Like I'm still not able to understand how these algorithms work. Can you just share some of that with the audience? Like when you talk about unbiased, and what exactly is the artificial intelligence relying on exactly?
absolutely. And so, I mean, the example that you just gave, I think that's great, and I think that is one form of AI, right? I think that's the
Hmm.
AI and the algorithms that the general public are just starting to be aware of, right?
Right.
That Facebook is creating your newsfeed based on your other activities, right? And so
Hmm.
if you are liking certain statuses, if you are commenting and engaging with certain content, Facebook's going to remember that. And what they're doing is they're storing all of your past behaviors and
Hmm.
deciding, okay, if Ishan is going to keep scrolling on Facebook, how do we keep him on Facebook longer,
Right.
right? And same with YouTube, for example, right? When you
Hmm.
watch videos on YouTube, if you're watching a lot of, say, educational videos about a certain topic, YouTube is going to keep feeding you that content because they think,
Hmm.
okay, this is what Ishan is interested in. He's going to keep watching it. He's going to stay on YouTube longer. He's going to see more advertisements if we keep him on our website, right? And
Right.
so that's how algorithms work, and that's how I think a lot of us understand it right now. But I think, for example, we see in the U.S. algorithms and AI being used to make policing decisions, right? And so police are being sent to certain, neighborhoods, certain communities, actually a lot of times based on
Hmm.
what an artificial intelligence tells them. And the way that the AI is being trained before it's being used by police departments is they're looking at where police have historically gone, where they have made the most arrests, right? And so if
Right.
let's say there's neighborhood A and neighborhood B, right?
Hmm.
Neighborhood A is a very wealthy neighborhood, um, and there's not typically as much crime there because people are maybe they're affluent, they're working during the day, they're lucky enough to have an education, they're working. But let's say neighborhood B, right? They're less fortunate. It's a community that isn't quite as well off, and as a result, there might be more crime there. But
Hmm.
the thing is that we're tracking crime, or we're determining what crime is based on where arrests are being made. And at least in the United States, there's a
Ouch.
really big sort of racist history there, right?
Right.
Where police officers have historically targeted, well, black and brown people, right?
Hmm.
And so as a result, at least with predictive policing, we have police officers following an artificial intelligence that is just repeating patterns of behavior that have been sort of solidified over the past 10 years or the past several years and throughout our history. And now they're just repeating those same behaviors. They're going to the same communities. They're policing the same neighborhoods because that algorithm was trained to do just that. It's telling you exactly what you already know, right?
Right. Wow. Oh my God. That was like, I think that just cleared in my mind that AI is not as unbiased as I thought it was. Right. Right. So I would there was this recent article I was reading. It was this new interview published on The Guardian by Daniel Kahneman. So basically he said that it's common knowledge at this point that artificial intelligence will soon be capable of outworking humans, if not entirely outmoding them, in plenty of areas. How much will be outworked and outmoded, and on what scale is still up for debate. But in a new interview published by The Guardian over the weekend, Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman had a fairly hot take on the matter. In the battle between AI and humans, he said that it is going to be an absolute blowout, and humans are going to get creamed. Clearly, AI is going to win against humans. It's not even close, Kahneman told the paper. How people are going to adjust to this is a fascinating problem. What are your thoughts on this statement?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think he's right in a lot of ways, right? I think especially when we're thinking about automation, right? I think one of the very first motivations of using artificial intelligence and relying on
Hmm.
algorithms, right, is to automate processes, right? And so we're seeing in factories, for example, right, we have taught machines to build our cars, to produce our products, etc. And so I think with respect to automation, yeah, artificial intelligence will certainly outpace people, right? You can analyze more data by teaching an artificial intelligence how to do that, right? You give them a set of instructions and the machine will process it much faster than a person ever could,
Hmm.
right? And I think, I think when you think about production, when you think about, business even, AI is doing some really incredible things. And I do think though that it's, there are problems because it's also, I think, resulting in a lot of people losing their jobs, right? And I think that's a
Right.
reality that we're facing right now. Now, I think where I think AI will, for a long time, I think continue to fail and lose to humans is I think when there needs to be some nuance in that thinking, right? When we do need to think about exceptions, when we need to sort of,
Like,
well, I think there are certainly decisions that we make as humans, right, where we rely on our humanity or we are sympathetic
hmm.
and we make decisions that way, right? And so, I think an artificial intelligence oftentimes is taught to act the way that it does based
Hmm.
on a set of instructions, or they're being trained on data that's been collected already, right? And so when that happens, as we were talking about earlier, we see a repeating pattern, right? We see sort of AI in that sense works like a mirror, right? It reflects the past into the future and it
Right.
continues that trend. And so we've talked about sort of how it's being used in sentencing. We've talked about how it's used to make policing decisions. And if we solely rely on artificial intelligence in those spaces, I think we'll continue to sort of lose our humanity in that way, right? We are no longer able to make decisions about, okay, well, we need to ask questions like, should we even rely on a machine to do that? As people, we are already biased. How can we change the way that we, as police officers, how do we change the way that we interact with the community? As a judge, how can I look at this person's history? How can I, think about the change in someone's behavior and make decisions about, what is the best outcome for them? Is it okay to use a machine to send someone to prison, right? And so an example I think of a lot is when we developed autopilot, right, for an airplane.
Right.
We didn't suddenly start sending passengers onto commercial flights without
Hmm.
any pilots in the cockpit, right? we
Right.
still have typically two pilots sitting in the cockpit, and so we can't remove humans from processes even once we've automated them, right?
Right.
Especially for things that have such a profound impact on other human beings, right? And
Hmm.
so I think it's important to keep people in those important decisions, right? I don't think judges are going to get replaced by machines, right? Can you imagine a world where a robot, right, is essentially making a decision about whether someone goes to prison or not? That sounds like a sci-fi movie and a
Yeah.
scary one too,
It's a
right?
very scary
I don't
thought.
exactly, and so we don't want that. I don't think we want that reality. We don't want a machine making decisions about you can stay in this country, right? When we think about immigration, we don't want a machine that's deciding whether someone can stay in the country. We don't want a machine telling police officers where they can go to police. We don't want a machine that's making these really big decisions. And I think it's important to sort of keep our humanity in those processes.
Wow. That was a lot of real stuff back there, man. What you just said. I mean, I've never heard anybody talk about it in so much detail. I mean, we're just talking about, artificial intelligence being the next big thing. And so like, I was just seeing one of these interviews from a man named Kunal Shah. He's one of the top entrepreneurs in India right now, like one of the most reputed entrepreneurs. And I saw this interview in which he talked about the impact of innovation in an entrepreneurship and automation and how it would negatively impact India. And like, for example, when let's talk about the motor car, when cars came into existence after Henry Ford changed things up, the production for horses just went down, right? So what he said, and it's quite true that when AI takes over, like even the basic automation and fact our factories, a lot of people, a lot of workers would be losing their jobs worldwide, and they may or may not have no alternative. So I mean, that's what we're concerned about here in India right now. We're not talking a lot about it, but that may not be a problem for another 5 years at least. But it is an upcoming wave of problems that we need to figure out. But I just want to know your opinion from what's it like in America right now, from automation and the rise of artificial intelligence as well as unemployment. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think automation is one of the biggest drivers of unemployment in the United States, actually, especially in industries like um, automobiles, right? Like making cars, even Amazon warehouses, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are robots doing the
The
packaging.
robots, really?
There are, yeah,
Wow.
there are robots who are also doing things like sorting the inventory, even
Okay.
packaging and keeping track of where different products are situated in a warehouse, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I think at least in the United States, because employment and unemployment and social welfare is such a politicized problem, oftentimes we blame unemployment on immigrants. We blame it on sort of these other things that I don't think actually have a very big impact on unemployment, right? You may or may not know, but for example, during the Trump administration, one thing that he went after the H-1B visa, right? And he said,
Right.
okay, we don't want any more immigrants coming in stealing our jobs. That was sort of the rhetoric that we kept hearing over and over again, right?
Hmm.
That
Right.
immigrants were stealing American jobs. But the reality is, I mean, the H-1B is for some of the most educated people from around the world to come to the United States, right? Something like I think 2/3 of all people with H-1B visas have at least a bachelor's degree, and something like
Right.
20 to 30% actually have a master's or even a PhD, right? And so these aren't the jobs that are being lost to automation necessarily, right? We still rely on, most of the people who come in with an H-1B are software developers, right? Those
Right.
jobs aren't quite automated yet. In fact, they're the ones who are oftentimes creating things like artificial intelligence or creating a lot of technical products that
Hmm.
are still, very valuable to both the employer and to the market that they're in, right? And so
Right.
automation is I think the driving factor causing unemployment in countries like the U.S. and soon I think in countries around the globe, because we're going to stop relying on manual labor to build cars, to make products, or even to sort through inventories for retail, right? And I
Right.
think very soon we'll be relying on artificial intelligence for that in a much larger capacity. And as you already acknowledged this, right? There isn't necessarily an alternative for these people, right?
Right.
Um, and so where we a lot of times we think, okay, well, we'll just retrain them. They can go back to school or whatever. But well, they might not have gone to school in the first place because they couldn't afford it. University, especially in the
True.
United States, is extremely expensive, right? And it's not like you can just instantly change your skill set, right? If you have been working in a factory or working in a warehouse, and that is, or working construction even, just as a few examples, if that's what you've been doing for X number of years, that is your skill set. And if all of a sudden, because technology improves and innovates so quickly, if that is now replacing what you have been trained to do, your expertise or your skill set is no longer as relevant. What do? Right? It's difficult to just
Right.
switch over. Right? You can't suddenly become a coder, right? If you've been working in a factory your whole life, you're not going
Hmm.
to suddenly become a coder, right? Not overnight, right? And so I don't have a good solution, but I do think that automation is, a driving force in causing people to lose jobs. I do think so.
Uh-huh. All right. So I also saw on your LinkedIn profile that you're currently writing a book. Is it about artificial intelligence?
That's right. Actually, a lot of the same problems that we were just talking about earlier, about sort of artificial intelligence being used in the U.S. criminal justice system. That's what the book is about.
Okay. So are you going to be providing some of your solutions or something as well in the book? Or how are you going to go about with that book? What kind of message do you plan on leaving the readers with the book?
Right. So the book, right now, the working title is Machine See, Machine Do, and that's sort of a play on words on the saying monkey see, monkey do, right? And um, there are a lot of layers to that, but sort of the idea that, like, well, we think of machines as hyper intelligent, super intelligent things, and they're not always that case, right? A lot of times they're just repeating without thinking what
Hmm.
humans have been doing, right?
Right.
And so the book is really structured. I've talked a little bit about it here, but first with policing, how AI is being used in policing, how it's being used to analyze evidence, specifically DNA, and then talking about sentencing and how it's being used by courts. Um, once someone's been arrested, if they're in court, sort of how are judges relying on algorithms to make their decisions. And then the very
Mhm.
final part of the book, that's where I go into some solutions. And so, just very broadly, for example, I don't think we can rely on AI as the sole uh, you know decider of these of these different things, right? And so
Right.
I think we need to keep people in that process. And I also talk a lot about sort of how we need to change the way that we use data to train algorithms, right? We rely on historical data, or sometimes we use, um, you're not allowed to use race in an algorithm, right? You can't say,
Right.
oh, this person is this certain race, and so this is the decision that we should make about their sentence in court. But there are a lot of other determinations. There are a lot of other variables that we use that sort of act like proxies of race, right? Things like education level, zip code, where someone lives, is often determined by or often closely associated with their race as well. And when we rely on those variables, we're essentially still making decisions based on race, right? And so
Right.
that's a problem too. But yeah, I talk about different solutions to address that, and I've been fortunate enough to talk to a lot of experts and a lot of very interesting people to sort of get their take as well.
Mm-hmm. What was the reaction when you told them that you're writing a book about this?
Um, the reception's been largely positive. Right? I think a lot of people are wow, this is a really interesting topic. It's definitely a very timely one. I think people in the general public are just starting to sort of be aware of, okay, this is what artificial intelligence is. Oh, it's everywhere. And so I think people are starting to understand just how ubiquitous artificial intelligence is, right? And so
Right.
I think it's a really important topic. And as I said, we've talked about how it's being used to sort of hijack your brain on social media, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people are starting to be aware of, right? When you are scrolling forever on, Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, that's the algorithm at work, right? It's trying to provide you with content that will keep you hooked. But we don't always think about how that same technology is being used to potentially send people to prison, to arrest people, to analyze the evidence that decides whether someone is innocent or guilty. We don't think about that. And so I want to write this book to sort of highlight those problems. And my goal is to really make it easy to understand for as many people as possible, because I
Right.
think it's such an important issue. And so just trying to get the word out really is the goal of the book.
That sounds very, very interesting. How long have you been writing this book? It seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work. I started researching for the book, or really starting to focus on the book, I would say the end of 2020, around
Okay.
October, November, I would say. And right now I'm about 2/3 way through writing the first draft of the manuscript. And so the plan is to actually have it published by December of this year.
Okay. So it's going to be an ebook or a physical copy?
It'll be available in both. Actually, it'll be both on ebook, and I should have physical copies as well.
Okay. Right. So like we're talking about a lot about artificial intelligence. Um, like again, you told me that from a legal background and then you're moving towards artificial intelligence. So could you tell us about your first, have you ever have had an encounter with artificial intelligence like in real life at a pretty decent level such that you can see that okay, this was a lot of exposure to AI in my life?
I guess I mean, I think with respect to the technology that I've talked about, right? I think like I haven't really been personally, I think, affected by it. I think I'm very lucky to not have been, right? I mean, I I think what I think about is like facial recognition, right, which is largely powered by artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very simple and very innocent example, but I know when Facebook first started using photo tagging, first started using photo tagging, right, it would recognize your face in a photo and suggest a tag for it. I have a younger brother, and Facebook, when it first rolled out this feature, would often mistake the two of us. Um, and that's
Oh.
because obviously their AI isn't as good at deciphering
Hmm.
or making distinctions between maybe Asian people, right?
Right,
Um,
right,
maybe it was mostly trained to identify white faces.
right.
And so that's very innocent, right? My brother and I would laugh about it sometimes. The photo that I'm posting, it'll mistake it for my brother and vice versa.
How long
And so,
ago was this?
oh, this is the early 2010s, I would say.
Oh, so that was like when Facebook's it was in its initial stages.
Yeah, I would say early
Right.
2010s, maybe the late 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
That's roughly when
So
I first started
facial
using
recognition
Facebook.
was pretty much primitive, just like the new Apple silicon chip, I would say. It's very, very
Sure.
primitive.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Um, Now that's really sort of innocent, right? someone,
Right.
a facial recognition tool sort of getting you wrong for social media, that doesn't really have any negative effects. But there are still very high error rates with facial recognition. I really suggest checking out some research done by Joy Bolamwini. She's at MIT, and she's done really, really interesting research on facial recognition and how there's a lot of racial and gender bias in the way that facial recognition works, right? And so,
Right.
um, just to give an example, right? Facial recognition, when there are high error rates, when it's not good at identifying certain faces, and you're using it to, as a surveillance tool, right, on the
Hmm.
streets, when you're relying on cameras and you're using facial recognition to decide whether someone committed a crime in a neighborhood or not, if it's not good at distinguishing between people in a certain community, you could have someone who could be wrongfully arrested for a crime that they never did because an artificial intelligence tool is just not advanced enough yet, right?
Right.
And so that becomes a problem, and that's a really scary outcome, right? You are just going about your day, and because you happen to maybe share features with, um, physical characteristics or physical features with whoever
Hmm.
might have committed the crime, and because the people who developed the tool didn't account for you, didn't train the tool enough using images of you, it's less accurate. And now all of a sudden the police are knocking on your door, right?
Right.
That's a really, awful outcome, right? And the thing too is that a lot of times I hear people saying, well, we can train the artificial intelligence to be better, right? We can eventually make facial recognition 100% accurate. But my fear is, do we really want that, right? Do we want, even if when tools become unbiased and facial recognition, for example, is 100% accurate, do we really want a situation where police officers, without even being there, can just identify you with 100% accuracy and watch you constantly? I don't think we do, right? I think that's really
We
oppressive.
don't. That's a question. That's a pretty interesting question for the audience to think about.
Absolutely. I think, you know, the goal to fixing biased AI should not just be to make it perfect, right? Because I think even perfect AI can be used in really nefarious ways.
Hmm.
Can be used in ways that can really harm our communities, right? I don't think we should be using AI in that way, you know?
Right. I mean, I haven't read a lot about AI. I mean, I might have seen a few interviews and a few articles on it. So again, like, I really want to thank you for like giving me and my audience so much of information about AI. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten to know so much otherwise. And I think
Yeah,
that's the great
absolutely.
thing. Yeah, like there's so much that you can learn from. Not everybody can, take out the time, like hours every single day, and going through news articles, interacting with people, and getting to know. I think this is much better when you have somebody who knows a lot, such as yourself, to come on board and talk about it and share their experiences with people. I really thank you for that, man.
Yeah, no, Ishan, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to speak on your podcast, and yeah, I mean, I think this is something I'm very passionate about, and so I've spent a lot of time researching and reading about it, and I
Hmm.
think the podcast format is a great way to share that information, and so yeah, I'm very glad that I got to do this, and yeah, thank you for inviting me onto the show.
Cool. So I if I were to I think I just have a few more questions and then I think we'll wrap this up because it's almost an hour. Um First, where do you see yourself working towards AI in the next over the next 2 or 3 years? W- What are you gonna do with regards? Are you gonna do something with regards to artificial intelligence?
I'd like to. I would like to. I still have one more year of law school left, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think. a lot of my interest in the artificial intelligence space is I want to continue to do research. I want to continue writing. And one of the goals of the book is to really sort of get my own opinions and my own research out into the world, have people read it, engage with it, even challenge it, right? I
Yeah.
welcome people to read it and to sort of even change my point of view, on artificial intelligence. But I'd love to, continue doing that research, continue writing, and my sort of long-term goal is I'd love to eventually teach about artificial intelligence and the law. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's sort of the end goal, is that I can really devote my career to researching AI, how it affects the law, and hopefully teach other people about how it does that. So yeah, that's the dream for me.
Hmm. That sounds, that is a very amazing vision, man. I wish you best luck for it.
Thank you so much.
Cool. So okay, I just wanna if you were to leave this audience with two amazing lines, what would those two statements be?
Ooh, okay. Is this about AI or about a particular topic or?
Anything you feel like, whatever you want to talk about, it's on you.
Ooh, okay. Um, I'm gonna take a step back from AI for a second. I'm gonna say, for your audience, I think curiosity is a really powerful thing. I think if there's a topic that you are really intellectually curious about, that you're interested in, and that you're passionate about, right? If there's something
Right.
that really sparks something in you, pursue it, right? I think that's we need we can trust our instincts. If there's a topic that you find just so fascinating, um, pursue it, study it, understand it, and find ways to learn as much as you can about it, right? I think when
Right.
we as people, when we are curious about something, that's a sign that we should chase after it, right? And I'm very fortunate that sort of artificial intelligence is the law. That's what it is for me, right? Is that as much work as it has been to write the book, and as much effort as it has been to, I think, really study and research this space. I don't find that I get that tired doing it because I enjoy it so much. And I think
Right.
when you find something like that for yourself, hold on to it, and really go after it.
Wow. That was those were really really nice statements, man. I really thank you for sharing them with my audience. Wow. I mean, for the
Yeah, thank
first
you.
time, like, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, generally, it's me like just directly going and starting to talk, but I think I'm letting myself. I'm allowing these statements to just immerse in me for a second. So I'm a little bit calm right now. I'm a little bit quiet right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, man. It was a huge pleasure. It was a great pleasure to have you on my show. Thank you very much, Patrick. I think we'll wrap this up right now.
Yeah, great.
I
Thank you, Ishan.